Got a fun story, though. A DEA judge has denied the agency's request to block witnesses in a hearing challenging a proposed psychedelics ban. This one's important because it talks about two legal psychedelics. If you're smart, you can on the internet maybe get some yourself. Drug Enforcement Administration administrative judges denied the federal agency's request to block a series of witnesses and evidentiary exhibits in a forthcoming hearing on its plans to ban a pair of psychedelic compounds used primarily for research purposes. Administrative law judge Paul Sefting granted DEA's motion to keep proposed evidence out of the 10-day hearing, which is scheduled to begin on November 12th, denied the agency's claim that certain witnesses and materials should be precluded on the basis they were incompetent, irrelevant, immaterial, or unduly repetitious. With respect to the witnesses, the ALJ said it was inappropriate at this time to block the testimony of experts, including those associated with Students for Sensible Drug Policy and ASEA Plant Sciences, which have been fighting against the DEA to ensure that the psychedelics can continue to be utilized in research. However, having made clear that its denial of DEA's motion doesn't necessarily mean that the evidence and witnesses will be allowed to be entered into the record. Rather, he said that in this preliminary stage it's too soon to determine what is going to be relevant to the case. This case concerns the DEA's push to place the psychedelics 2,5-dimethoxy-4-iodoamphetamine, DOI, 2,5-dimethoxy-4-chloroamphetamine, DOC, Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. I believe they're still trying to do this shit. Currently, unscheduled substances have been used in various research initiatives to explore their potential in the treatment of conditions such as chronic, acute, and neuropathic pain, addiction to opioids and alcohol, and other mental health disorders. The government has asked the ALJ for preemptive summary exclusion of proposed evidence from researchers and advocates, the administrative judge said. Part of the reason DEA sought to block certain witnesses from testifying because of their focus on how a Schedule 1 designation would impede research initiatives, just like it's doing on cannabis, which the agency argued was irrelevant to the case at hand. The ALJ disagreed, saying the tribunal does not find that research harm evidence is per se irrelevant to these proceedings, such that preemptive exclusion of such testimony is required. While the judge did side with DEA on a number of evidentiary items it sought to be excluded, it denied the outright request. And that represents a partial, meaningful win for opponents of this proposed ban. Science prevails, SSDP Executive Director Kat Murdy told Marijuana Moment on Monday. DEA is trying to force medical research into the dark ages by criminalizing both DOI and DOC. Potential research chemicals in preclinical psychiatry and neurobiology, whose status as unscheduled compounds has made them de facto tools for researchers studying serotonin receptors. SSDP is proud to have brought together the world's leading experts in neuroscience and pharmacology who will testify to the immense harm that will be caused by adding DOI and DOC to Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, Murdy said. He added that the judge's decision is a victory not only for scientific integrity, but for the tens of thousands of Americans suffering from depression, anxiety, chronic pain, as well as those who are at risk of opioid overdose and all of their loved ones, all of whom benefit. Following a public comment period, DEA's ALJ Sofing in August set an administrative hearing on the matter from November 12th to 22nd, with a final meeting on the 25th of November. This all comes as DEA separately scheduled a December hearing to gain additional input on the Biden administration's marijuana rescheduling proposal, a move that will delay that reform from potentially taking effect until after the presidential election. Meanwhile, SSDP was among stakeholders who requested the psychedelics hearing in hopes of challenging what they view as a lack of evidence justifying the DEA's proposed ban. Researchers have pointed out that DOI and DOC, as currently unscheduled substances, have been key components in psychedelic research that show potential in the treatment of anxiety and depression. For example, researchers have argued that DEA has failed to meet the statutory burden of demonstrating that either psychedelic compound has high abuse potential. There are no documented cases in medical literature of distressing responses or death ever related to human consumption of DOI, nor has there been any established evidence of a high risk of dependence. The initial scheduling of the administrative hearing came about 2 months after a federal court dismissed a case challenging the constitutionality of DEA's process for adjudicating scheduling action, as the agency seeks to ban the two psychedelic compounds. To date, there are no reports of distressing responses or death associated with DOI in medical literature, it said. The physiological dependence liability of DOI and DOC in animals and humans is not reported in scientific and medical literature. DEA, however, said that anecdotal reports posted by people online signaled that the substances have hallucinogenic effects. making it reasonable to assume that DOI and DOC have substantial capability to be a hazard to the health of the user and the safety of the community. It did point to one report of a death of a person who had used DOC in combination with 2 other unspecified drugs, as well as 2 reports of hospitalizations that it said were attributable to the use of DOC with other drugs. Scientists say that hardly constitutes reason enough to place them in the most strictly controlled schedule. The background of this development, the Justice Department's public comment on its proposal to move marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 under the CSA officially closed this past summer. These requests were seen by many reformers as a way not only to push back on Biden's administration's rescheduling plan, but also to potentially delay the formal implementation of the action amid an effort by opponents to shoot it down. What we have is continued work by the drug war mafia to limit and control access, access to substances for us, to control our conscious and mental sovereignty, to basically keep us in a box with our head down, work until we die for the man. This is St. Germain on a Friday for the High at 9 News. Really looking forward to what the doctors and my fellow correspondents and hosts have to say. Thank you so much. Take it away, guys.
Did you call us hosts?
Trying to stifle progress. Surprise, surprise.
Right? I'm not surprised by this. Go ahead.
Substance abuse, I mean, to me, this is an argument against descheduling, because if you really want to deschedule, get rid of the whole Controlled Substances Act. And so descheduling becomes an incremental step, just like rescheduling is an incremental step. It continues the problem of penalizing people who use substances who abuse substances and making them criminals, rather than saying that they have a health condition that needs help, right? And rather that, you put them in jail. Not good. Controlled Substances Act is a problem. And I'm outing those people who are saying deschedule. You're missing the point. Abolish the Controlled Substances Act or bust, not deschedule or bust.
I agree, Doctor, and we need to highlight that the DEA and the CSA Act were enacted by Nixon in order again to control the Black Panthers, the Weather Underground, the Students for a Democratic Society, the anti-war movement, all who were utilizing their First Amendment rights as U.S. citizens to at least speak out about things that they wanted to change in the government. Since they were not breaking the law, the Nixon administration, in a blatantly fascist move, and to restrict certain drugs that it knew were a known nexus between groups in order to make them prosecutable. Another thing the DEA has done, and they even show it on, I think, the first or second season of Narcos on Netflix, the DEA was also enacted as a cover organization for the CIA, so that the CIA could continue to smuggle hard drugs into America to, number one, fund their black budget projects, which are their off-the-books projects that they don't have to report to Congress. They also did it to continue to destroy the black and brown communities in America in hopes of preventing the rise of another group such as AIM, the American Indian Movement, and or the Black Panthers, as well as the United Farm Workers. The war on drugs has been a blatantly racist and classist attempt all down and deprive us of our inborn freedom and sovereignty as human brothers and sisters on. Dr. Mark?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you were talking about 4CB or maybe 2CB earlier. So these 2 drugs, DOI and DOC, are part of a family of drugs that Sasha Shulgin made in the late 80s and early 90s, and is actually described in great detail in his book Peakyle, right? Yep. Because these are phenethylamines, or what are typically or more commonly called amphetamines. So DOC and DOI are basically 4-chloro and 4-iodo substituted. So Matthew, you'll be interested. So 4CB, which has got a little bit more notoriety, is the 4-bromo derivative, right? Okay. So there's a whole family of derivatives. If you look this up on the web, you'll see. So these all have a 2,5-methoxyamphetamine kind of core with different substituents down there. So I think, the DEA would probably throw the analog thing at this.
So they possibly could.
Yeah, no matter what Shulgin made at that position. But it's interesting, like you said, there was I guess one fatality from DOC, but no fatalities from DOI, or is it the other way around? Well, I forget.
Right, but the fatality from DOC, the person was on 2 other unnamed drugs.
Was on other drugs too as well.
Yeah, so using that logic, we could literally say cucumbers are deadly because people have gone to the hospital on other combinations of drugs and died while they had cucumbers in their. So it's a huge jump over this logic gap to say that it was the DOC that was harmful.
That the toxicity was strictly due to that, yeah. So I guess the other issue to think of here is, again, like these compounds have been investigated as antidepressants. They're, again, part of this whole psychedelic renaissance, which I know Matthew's reported on here at High at 9 News quite a bit. There's a lot of, clinically relevant data that these compounds represent. So I think, painting it with a broad brush and moving it into Schedule 1, I mean, they already know that these things are antidepressant. They could help with actually withdrawal from psychedelics, which is really super interesting. Oh. I don't know if you saw this, really? Matthew, but I think it's either DOC or DOI. One has got a very LSD kind of like trip associated with it, but it lasts longer. So
I think that's DOI.
That's DOI. Yeah. So
DOA.
Yeah, exactly. Just be glad you're not DOA.
And there's another psychedelic that was going around for a minute in the early 2000s called 5-MeO-DIPT. It was called Foxy was the street name. And people were using it as an LSD substitute, because in the early 2000s there was a real shortage of LSD in the country due to some big busts. And that one is very dangerous. If you encounter Foxy, I highly recommend staying away from it, because the threshold amount between enough to be high and enough to wind up in the emergency room is very minute. When it comes to most of these other substances, especially the Shulgin substances, they're incredibly safe.
Mm-hmm.
2 more drugs.
I got to see a great talk by him one time that was, and Dr. Mark, of course, you'd be an expert at this, where he was explaining the chemical symmetry and showing that what he did was he took these known drugs and he would literally show, like, here was an OH group, so an oxygen hydrogen, and I would move that OH group using this chemical, and I'd put a sulfur here, and I'd move the OH over here, and he would literally be showing, and he had such a facility and ability to describe this in visual language that you could see and visualize in your mind's eye this superstructure, how he was using different solvent and reagent processes to move different molecules here and there, and getting increases or decreases in potency or in total trip time or body effect or more visuals. And the reference books that Dr. Mark mentioned, PIHKAL, PIHKAL, and TCAL, phenylethylamines I have known and loved, and tryptamines I have known and loved, are amazing books because they go through this process. You're
talking about FICAL and TICAL.
TCAL and TCAL.
Yeah.
They talk about his processes, working with DuPont, creating a couple of novel chemicals that led to him getting a DEA scheduled license. Mm-hmm. And then his work with his wife as a psychologist and his group of friends in making and testing and trying these chemicals and then sharing them with the greater community.
Yeah, no, these
They're
guys,
really an amazing read.
Yeah, this couple, I have both of these books, Mathieu St, Germain, and so I'm very familiar. They were having freaking crazy party ragers at their house and whatnot, and like all part of their whole research and experiments with this stuff. It's a very, very trippy book.
A couple of my friends are pretty high up there at the Shulgin Foundation, and so if you ever want to go and visit Alexander's lab, Sasha's lab, it's still up. It's extant, really cool. And it is visible, and we could take a field trip out there and check it out.
That would be very cool. I would be with that.
And it still has similar to Dr. Mark's whiteboard, it still has his scrawls on the chalkboard behind some of the glassware that you can see.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a cool movie on YouTube called Dirty Pictures. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the dirty pictures that you're thinking of. The dirty pictures are reference to the chemical structures sketched out on these bottles.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really cool video. It talks all about Sasha's thing. And what you're talking about there, Matthew, is something that us chemists refer to as structure-activity relationships. So we look to see when we got an active, what we call pharmacophore, which is an active molecule, we look to sort of decorate different groups on those molecules, try to find out, which way is up and which way is down. So that's it. Quantitative structure-activity relationship.
And it's so interesting. And the other thing is the enantiomer and isomer quality of molecules, where a molecule that is structurally spiraled one direction will have one action, and then if you have a mirror image spiral, it can have a completely different action. And I saw this recently I learned this about limonene. Limonene is one of the main active terpenes in cannabis. And when it spirals one way, it tastes like gas, and when it spirals the other way, it tastes like a lemon citrus.
Yeah, that's right. And Dr. T will know that the thalidomide story. So molecules like my hands can either be the left-handed version of the molecule or the right-handed version. And thalidomide, which I think was prescribed to women with morning sickness, right, in the early 60s, it turned out that one of the enantiomers, not both, but one of them, elicited these terrible birth defects. And so thalidomide is usually the poster child for you got to have the right molecule in there.
Interesting, man. Lots of great knowledge. We got to go to a commercial. We're going to be right back.